Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. As many of you already know, especially if you watch my content, I had talked about how black farmers have been suing the USDA after decades of discrimination when it comes to money from that department, which was supposed to be going to black farmers but was always denied. Apparently, there has been a $2 billion program, or what have you, that the USDA is supposed to be doing, but it's for black farmers and other minorities. We'll get to that in a moment. It's been a couple of weeks since this news broke, and I'm sure the number of you have been wondering how come Professor Truth hasn't weighed in on it. Same reason that I don't immediately leap to talk about every victim of police violence. I've learned that when it comes to some of these things, you want to be a little bit careful just to see what they're going to say. But I think that just enough time has at least passed where I feel confident or at least comfortable that I can say something. Though I gotta say that a better question would be, why isn't Joe Biden talking about this? Or why aren't the shills and Democratic plants that we see online, why aren't they talking about this? Why aren't they boasting about this? Well, when we actually look at it, we see why that is. The money is supposed to be going to black and other minority farmers. Now, black farmers were the ones who brought this lawsuit in the first place. Wasn't Hispanic farmers, wasn't Asian farmers, wasn't anybody else. It was black farmers who brought this lawsuit on behalf of black farmers. But of course, as usual, the white media puts black in the headline, and they make sure they have a black face in the picture too. But when you read it, you see, oh, it's for everybody. It's not just for black people, it's for everyone. Yeah, there you go. Just like Claude Anderson said, it's the farmers' version of lift all boats. So that means people who showed up just last week from Indonesia or Ukraine or from Mexico City or who planted a turnip patch somewhere, they can make a claim and they can say that it's supposed to be for everybody. Once again, black people are the ones who have to take the slings and arrows. Black people are the ones who have to wage the war for years, if not decades on end. We're the ones who have to shed blood for these things. And then everybody else gets to walk up and get something handed to them just because. And that's a fact. The only reason this is happening at all is because of the black farmers and no one else. Now, although the USDA has only just begun to start giving people the money that they're supposed to be getting, allegedly, the question I want to know is, how much money have the black farmers who actually waged this fight gotten compared with the minorities? Because I told you about the same thing that happened with the Minority Business Development Agency. It was supposed to be helping minorities, but most of its aid goes to Hispanics and Asians, even though black businesses make up a larger share of non-white businesses in America. If the number of black and Hispanic people in America is about the same, slight advantage allegedly for Hispanics, why is it then when it comes to something like the Minority Business Development Agency, Hispanics get so much more money, even though black businesses outnumber them? So even these programs and agencies that say they give aid to black people, they also discriminate, and they do it openly. And yet, as usual, when it comes to black people, everybody else has to be included. This is how the black wealth gap is maintained. When everybody else gets something, black people are excluded. And it takes decades, if not a century or more, for black people to get these injustices brought to court. And if anything does get paid, then we're told, well, it has to be for everyone or not at all. If somebody hits your car and destroys it, would everybody on the road be entitled to a compensation check from the insurance company? Of course not, but that's what white power does. 100 years ago, black people owned more land than anyone else in America except for white farmers. 14% of America's farmers were black, and yet over the last 100 years, practically all of those black farmers' land has been stolen by the government through racist maneuvers. This is why we're owed reparations. The U.S. government decided to hand the USDA's authority for financing over to so-called local boards to distribute federal money, knowing full well that these boards are comprised of white racist farmers and their pals who would categorically deny black farmers the funds that they're owed. Now, black farmers have been complaining about this for a century now, but nothing's been done. The government's known all about it. They were the ones who set this up. They were supposed to be handling all of these payments themselves, but in choosing to hand these functions over to local racists, the federal government must also share in the blame. This was the result of their deliberate decision. And while I'm glad to see that the word reparations has been mentioned by a number of these black farmers and their representatives, this also needs to be applied to this situation as well aggressively. The federal government wanted to take black land, but they didn't want their fingerprints on the gun, so they pulled this maneuver and outsourced it to some local hayseeds. In every other case, the feds appoint or otherwise put in place a federal representative to administrate money, precisely to keep stuff like this from hindering the process. But in this case, the USDA went out of their way to put this federal program under local, read white racist control. And this is important Because the black farmers are also fighting for debt relief that they're also owed, which wouldn't even have been necessary if the government had not allowed white racists to discriminate against them for a century. The legal efforts to obtain the debt relief that these black farmers are owed is predictably being attacked by the very white racist farmers who discriminated against them in the first place. This is white supremacy out in the open. It doesn't get more blatant than this. But then again, slavery was largely about farming, now wasn't it? Those plantations were large-scale farms. And these white racists you see carrying out all of these illegal actions are in many cases the direct descendants of those same slave owners. These attacks against black farmers are part of an overall bipartisan war by Republicans and Democrats to prevent any sort of reparations from coming to bear. This is the entire thing I've been warning you about for years. They would claim that, well, here's something that's giving reparations to black people, but you're including everybody else. Well, if black people are able to apply for it, that ought to count as reparations too. I mean, it's for everyone. Ain't that what Kamala Harris said? Well, whatever helps black people is good for America, but I'm not going to do something that only benefits black people. Talking out of both sides of her neck. So both at the local level and all the way to the White House, they understand that they can't afford to have any bricks taken away from this wall, especially not at this political moment. So they demanded that any mention of black people be removed, and that instead this is going to be about anyone who claims that the USDA turned them down for money. Now, the debt relief that the black farmers have been demanding, there was allegedly some movement by Congress on this one, and predictably, you have a group of white farmers, the same white farmers who the USDA allows to decide who gets the money and who doesn't. These same racists are suing, claiming that if black farmers get compensated for the harm that these white racists did to them, then those very same white racists should get something. Many of these racists are politicians, by the way. Whenever these other groups are getting something for some sort of harm that was allegedly done to them, whenever other groups get some sort of reparations, notice how you never see black people go into court to try to block it or sue or say us too. No black person ever went to court to prevent reparations for Red Indians or for Japanese Americans or anyone else. And yet it is only when black people are bringing a reparations claim of any sort that we see these white supremacists and their non-white allies mounting lawsuits, screaming, and losing what passes for their minds on TV. Why? Because they know that there's a racial pyramid that we call the American social order, and that this pyramid rests on a foundation of holding black people down, and that repression begins and ends with economic deprivation. They all depend on it. And if that changes, then their place in the racial pyramid also changes. And they all depend on this racially stratified society to assign them a position higher than they could ever get on their own. Ed Blum literally couldn't get himself elected dog catcher, and it was his failure to be able to win elected office that made it where he whored himself out as a racist ambulance chaser for bigoted billionaires. And the same thing goes for Chris Rufo. He also tried to be a professional propagandist for the white right and utterly failed. He's failed at everything he's ever tried to do. Were it not for these white think tanks funded by these mega millionaires and billionaires, Chris Rufo would be selling pencils out of a cup on a street corner somewhere. These anti-black racists are not suspended in midair. This country has manufactured an entire economic scaffolding and support system to hold them up. Those black farmers earned the money that they're getting, and it's not even all that they're owed. They are owed a hell of a lot more. But those racists who are whining, they're owed nothing, because they haven't been deprived of anything. This is like after the Civil War. You got the plantation owners demanding reparations for non-existent harms. And you don't see Biden explaining that white farmers are not owed anything because they haven't been harmed. He's not saying it. He should be. In fact, he's not saying much of anything about this. The real point is to attack any sort of legislation or policy that makes reparations for racial discrimination against black people. Do you notice how specific I'm being? To give any sort of handout to the very white racist farmers who harmed these black farmers is an abomination. But this is why the Democrats' rising tide lifts all boats rhetoric is so dangerous. You cannot act as if everyone else has been treated the same as black Americans, because they have not. We and we alone are singled out. Everyone knows this. The same way they also know that the racial pecking order that all these other non-black groups depend on for their prosperity and social perks is based on selectively singling out only black people to be discriminated against and to deny any sort of economic opportunity. This is not happening because these anti-black racists genuinely believe that there's been harm. It's because for 500 years they've been shielded from having to compete. And as they've seen in music and sports and media, if they have to compete, they instantly lose. So for them, black empowerment is an existential threat. And this includes the Democrats. What's happened with these black farmers should be understood to be nothing more than just the tip of a very large, very ugly iceberg of racial discrimination against black people in America. It should be portrayed that way because that's what it is. Make it known that this is only the beginning. But that's not been going on at all. Instead, we've had the Democrats like Joe Biden who have been talking around it. They say words like discrimination, but they don't say who's been discriminated against. And they don't say black at all. They're not pointing out how the Ed Blums and others have to be shut down, and how compensation for anti-black racial discrimination has to be protected and promoted. He's not doing that. In fact, none of the Democrats are, not even your congressional black talkers. Because garbage like Ed Blum and others are actually working hand in hand with the Democrats. The Ed Blums allow the Democrats to be able to get black people to let them off the hook by saying they're not for anti-black discrimination, while at the exact same time allowing the Ed Blums to run around and use judicial lawfare to throw legislative roadblocks in our way. Garbage like Ed Blum serve a very important function for Democrats. He does the dirty work that allows them to have it both ways. Everyone recognizes that the real obstacle here is white fiat. The law is clear. There is no question that only the black farmers are owed anything. But we don't live under a system of laws. We live under a system of white supremacy, which is the opposite of justice. Instead of laughing the white farmers' lawsuits out of court, instead you've had these gangs of racial ideologues on the bench who Democrats allowed to be installed in the federal courts who have gone along with the scam. Democrats knew full well that there would be a white lash to any effort to pay the legal debt owed to black farmers, and they knew exactly who it would come from. So where's the policy promise that they're going to defeat these white supremacist attacks? Why aren't Democrats making this a plank of their policy platform? Why aren't they talking about it on the campaign trail, or at the DNC convention, or anywhere? Why aren't they talking about it on CNN or MSNBC? It's because they don't want this to become habit-forming. They've already gotten away with murder as they see it. Yeah, we can go ahead and claim that we did something for black farmers, but in actuality, we did something for everyone. The anti-black racial wealth gap is going to be maintained, and people didn't even see it. What I want to see is Democrats making this the litmus test if you want to get a federal judgeship. They should be grilling everyone on this. And they could turn this into the norm, and they know that. The more that you talk about anti-black racism, the more that you make it where, okay, this is something that has to actually be dealt with. But they don't want that to be the case. They want it to remain on the fringe. They want it to remain on the periphery. It's not supposed to be the core of any political discourse. Now, while it is true that this legislation may have happened on Biden's watch, it's also a fact that it's been in the offing for years. He wasn't the one who proposed it. You know, like he did the '94 crime bill, or as he liked to call it, Biden's law. He didn't sit there and say, you know what, in my capacity as a U.S. senator, I'm going to be writing legislation to make sure these black farmers get what they're owed. He didn't write any sort of legislation like that. And in the White House, he has not used the bully pulpit of the presidency to tell Nancy Pelosi at the State of the Union address or anywhere else, you need to get this legislation on my desk so that these black farmers can be made whole. Didn't happen at all. And before the plants and shills try to pat Biden on the back, why hasn't Biden been bragging about this? He should be, right? Well, he can't because it had very little to do with him in the first place, but he also isn't bragging because he doesn't want anyone getting the idea that he's going to be doing anything for black people. It's far better that black people themselves see it because they know that Negroes are so used to being completely and thoroughly politically ignored that if anybody even mentions us, we go absolutely apoplectic about it. We're like, oh my God, it's the second coming. They mentioned black people, period. And we never read the fine print, or in this case, we never even bother to actually read the headlines. We tend to give people all sorts of credit that they don't deserve. You see, other groups understand when their interests are truly being catered to and when somebody's trying to actually work around their interests. No matter how much money the Israel lobby gets, they always turn around and say, we need more than that. And they're absolutely shameless about it. They don't ever talk about, well, you know, we've actually got a number of deals in place where we're supposed to be getting a certain amount of money for like the next 10 years or so. They don't sit there and go, oh, okay, I guess that's enough. They say, no. However much you've given us, you got to give us more. Black people are the only ones who were told that if anybody even mentions this, oh, well, you're keeping saying that black people should be getting so, it can't just be about black people. Everybody else makes it all about them. We're the only ones who are told we need to pipe down. And we'll have Negroes in my comment section telling us that, well, black people, you can't just be making it about, black folks ain't really that important politically. You would never have any other constituency, no matter how small, having anybody, any sort of plants, shills, agents, or sellouts coming among them talking like that. But the entire reason we get these paid propagandists and liars who slither their way amongst us is precisely because they understand exactly how much political leverage black people have. We are the swing vote. If we turn out to vote, and only us, we make the difference between who gets into the White House and who doesn't. These other groups, they're already in the tank for the Republicans. Asians in the tank for the Republicans. Hispanics have already gone that way. Black people are the ones who decide who's going to get the White House. But they don't want black people to know that, so instead they tell black people, well, you just need to do as you're told. Or, well, there ain't enough black people to win the presidency on their own. Hey, stupid, ain't got to be enough for us to win the presidency on our own. We are kingmakers if we choose to act like it. So one of the things we have to keep demanding, one of the things we got to keep pushing for, is that tangibles for black people has to be a standard part of the American political discourse. Full stop. But Joe Biden, he ain't saying anything about this. He's not bringing this up and saying, I made sure that there's like 2,000. It's $2 billion, Joe. $2 billion for black people. Don't forget to say other minorities in general. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. You can't reverse 10 years, 100 years, Joe, 100 years of anti-black discrimination with one bill. How many untold billions have these minorities, make sure you say black and other minorities been denied over the years? We must do more. This is the beginning. We must do more. He ain't talking like that, isn't he? He's not saying anything at all. And Kamala Harris certainly isn't. Hell, she went on the record saying that she's not going to do anything that only benefits black people. So when you start talking about black farmers and what they're owed, she's going to be the first one to say, I'm not going to do something that's only going to benefit black people. No. So she didn't just limit that rhetoric to slavery. It also includes any and everything. So what has to be established for any sort of true reparations is exclusivity. When a government subjects the entire population to the same policy, no matter how odious, that's not discriminatory, it's simply bad public policy. And when a society discriminates against a specific group, but then decides to give everyone access to the same so-called quote-unquote relief program, that isn't reparations. In fact, it's not even relief. It's simply a stimulus package. It means nothing, because it doesn't repair or even change the status quo, which is what reparations is meant to do. It's meant to repair the harm done to the aggrieved party. And we must be specific that the harm has been done to black people for generations. Generations of targeted, exclusive economic deprivation that only we have been subjected to. But then again, how can we address the harm when Biden's own agriculture secretary specifically said that the aid these farmers were getting is not compensation for anyone's loss or pain endured? At least he told the truth on that one, though. This is not compensation for the loss or pain endured. Though we are going to get our pound, or rather ton of flesh on that one. What we don't need is controlled opposition. We need uncontrolled justice. Biden should not be getting our vote unless he pledges to combat the racism that we face. Stop treating anti-black racism as some sort of dirty word. Call it out, say what we are owed, and say this is going to be a standard plank of the political platform. He must admit that these aid programs have been set up to exclude black people and that we are owed for that, among many other things. And anyone wanting to vote for him, you have to demand it. If not, then what the hell are you doing? As black people, we simply have to stop settling. Stop settling. See, this is what happens when a group of people have been oppressed and denied even the most basic of things for an extended period of time. What happens is their expectations for themselves, others, and life in general just go through the floor. They get to the point where if somebody even looks in their direction, even with disdain, they just become so grateful for that. Oh, they're acknowledging my humanity. Sure, they look like they're disdainful of me and wish that I didn't exist, but they're looking my direction. I'm not used to that. That's what happens when people have been ignored, mistreated, and all the rest of it for a very long time. They start talking themselves into believing good things that actually aren't there. And this is especially bad when you mix this kind of codependency with politics. Black people have elections totally backwards. They think elections exist for the candidate's benefit. That's what they think elections are about. Elections are something that you do so you can be nice to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. For what? I don't know. In reality, though, elections are supposed to exist for the voters' benefit. Elections are not about the public's obligation to put some undeserving bureaucrat into high office. Elections are about the candidate's obligation to justify the public putting them in that office. If you're voting but you have no idea what you're going to get, or worse, you've decided the candidate doesn't need to do anything for you, then you're doing it wrong. I mean, who other than a total moron would feel good about taking part in a process where there's massive amounts of money and power on the line and everybody's getting something except them? Yet they try to con themselves into believing that they should feel good about taking part in this process because these other people benefited from it. Oh, well, at least somebody got something you didn't, stupid, and you're the one who's owed the most. This is the kind of foolishness that these shills and plants want you to engage in. While I can't stomach Kamala Harris's reprehensible past, it's a fact that she's made it clear she's not going to do anything different in the future, and that's what makes it where I'm not going to support her. And simply continuing to point to Republicans' racism isn't going to change my mind. This is not about trying to get me not to vote for the other guys. In that case, then I'll go ahead and give you that one. Okay, you convinced me. I'm not going to vote for the Republicans. But that still doesn't mean I'm going to vote for you. You got to give me a reason to vote for you. Now, the shills, the DNC plants, the baby boomers, and brain-dead bootlicks out there, they don't need a politician to give them something to get their vote, but I do. This is a good thing that the black farmers got something, but it's not good enough. We need to understand two things. One, it's compounding one injustice with another to give everybody else part of the compensation that only the black farmers are owed, especially when none of these other minority groups initiated or were even involved in the lawsuits that these black farmers brought. These other groups have no standing, and they're not owed anything. Certainly nothing compared to the black farmers. But watch as these other groups are going to be the ones who get the lion's share of that money. And you won't see the feds handing that money over to a black local panel to distribute. They're going to keep it in the feds' hands. So suddenly the same USDA and federal government that believed in white local control of these dollars, now all of a sudden they believe the locals can't get it right. This is too important for us to be handing it out to you guys. And the second thing to take away from all this is that the credit doesn't go to Joe Biden at all. He didn't initiate this lawsuit. In fact, it was Biden's segregationist mentors who caused this problem in the first place. And Biden spent his entire political career ignoring it. And even today, he only mentions it once in passing, and he doesn't even have the decency to mention black people at all. So he gets no credit for this. The credit should only go to the black farmers, the same way that the money should only go to them. But this is only the beginning. And as long as the Democrats refuse to make reparations a front burner issue, as long as they refuse to make exclusivity the cornerstone of this policy, and as long as they refuse to push it to the front of American political discourse, then as far as I'm concerned, both political parties and their shills can buy the farm. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Randy Crank, Christopher Ellis, Javier, Tomorrow Boyd, and Dia Williams. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.